Back in June of 1775, you had this ragtag group of American colonists staring down the most powerful army in the world on a small hill just outside of Boston. The fight that happened next, well, it would go on to change the entire course of the American Revolution. This is the story of the Battle of Bunker Hill. It was a brutal, incredibly bloody battle that taught both sides a really hard lesson. But it's probably most famous for one of the most iconic commands in military history. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. So we're going to dig into the reality of that fight and find out if that famous line is actual history or maybe just a myth. That command, it just perfectly captures the image we have of these disciplined, super determined colonists. But to really understand where that legend comes from, and frankly, whether it's even true, we first have to get into the brutal reality of the battle itself. All right, so let's set the scene here. The year is 1775. The American Revolution is, just getting started, and British forces are occupying Boston. But the city is completely surrounded, under siege by thousands of colonial militia. The whole battle really boiled down to a race for the high ground. See, both sides knew that whoever controlled the hills around Boston, hills like Bunker and Breed's Hill, would control the entire vital harbor. So when the colonists get wind of the British plan on June 13th, they make this incredibly daring move, marching overnight to build a fort on Breed's Hill before the British even knew what was happening. Now, the British commander, General Gage, he really doubted the colonists had it in them to fight. He asked a loyalist if their commander, a guy named William Prescott, would actually put up a fight. The response he got? Wow. It speaks volumes about the kind of determination the British were about to run into. Prescott wasn't just there to make a point. He was there to hold that hill, no matter what it took. The British generals, guys like William Howe and John Burgoyne, they were supremely confident. They looked at the colonial militia and basically called them an untrained rabble, thinking they'd be absolutely no match for their professional troops. So what did they plan? A direct frontal assault. The battle went down in 3 incredibly violent waves. In that first assault, the colonists held their fire until the British were right on top of them. Then they just unleashed a devastating volley that sent the regulars retreating in total chaos. The British regrouped and charged again, and believe it or not, they were cut down and forced to retreat a second time. Just stop and think about what this meant. This so-called untrained rabble had just pushed back 2 separate charges from the most powerful army on the planet. They inflicted horrific losses and proved they could absolutely stand toe-to-toe with professional soldiers. You can imagine the British High Command was just completely shocked. So what changed on that third assault? Well, the colonists ran out of their single most critical resource, ammunition. The fight just evolved into this brutal hand-to-hand combat. And this is where the British had a huge advantage. They had bayonets. Most of the colonists didn't. And that one factor was what finally allowed the British to storm the fort. So the British did take to Hill. But the cost of that little piece of ground was absolutely, positively staggering. The numbers here tell a shocking story. The British suffered over 1,000 casualties, which was more than double the American losses. And, critically, this included a huge number of their officers, a devastating blow to their entire command structure in North America. The battle became the textbook definition of a Pyrrhic victory. Yeah, you technically achieved your goal, but the cost was so incredibly high it felt way more like a defeat. And it wasn't just us looking back and saying that. Even the British leadership knew it at the time. General Henry Clinton, who watched the whole battle, wrote this in his diary. They understood they simply could not afford to have another win like Bunker Hill. Okay, so that brings us all the way back to the question we started with. What about that famous command? The whole thing about waiting to see the whites of their eyes. So here's where the story takes a really fascinating twist. For decades, American historians argued about who actually gave the famous order. Was it Colonel Prescott, or was it another officer, General Putnam? Well, as it turns out, they were probably both wrong. The origin of that phrase, it isn't even American at all. The key discovery actually came from a totally unexpected place. A historian, Thomas Carlyle, was researching Frederick the Great of Prussia, and he stumbles upon these military documents from decades before the Revolution, and in them, he finds commands using almost the exact same phrase. This wasn't some unique command born from American grit. It was a standard European military tactic to make every single shot count. So the story of Bunker Hill leaves us with two really powerful lessons. The first, for the British, was that this American resolve was no myth. And the second, for us, is that even our most cherished historical legends can have really surprising origins. It makes you wonder, right? How many other famous lines from history have a hidden story just waiting to be told?